So everyone is now in the Labour Party throwing Peter Mandelson cheerfully under the bus in regard to the police investigation that's going on after leaks of sensitive information by him to Jeffrey Epstein. He is potentially being reviewed for alleged misconduct in public office because of all the emails that were published recently relating to his time as business secretary in 2009. Everybody is deciding that he betrayed the country, that they're shocked and horrified by these allegations. And yet, Mandelson was a repeat offender in terms of breaking the rules, breaking the law. And yet, here he was, right at the top of government yet again. How does this reflect on Kier Starmer? How does it reflect on his right-hand man, Morgan McSweeney? And how does it reflect on the House of Lords and our so-called democracy when this man cannot have his peerage stripped away? Those are the headlines. Now for the podcast.
Well, hi folks, and welcome to this week's Leslie Riddoch podcast. It's been another exciting week for the UK Labour Party with other developments off and on. God almighty, I can't imagine any time. I'm trying to rack my brains of a situation where I could be photographed in really naff pants and somehow have absolutely no recollection of it. I had received 75 grand and have to double check because I couldn't remember and just be a wee bit bewildered by the whole thing. Never mind having leaked secret government information at the time of national crises. I mean, where to even begin with this list?
But all of it is like this. I mean, when you start looking at all the people who were taken in, okay, so Mandelson's in deep doo-doo now because of Jeffrey Epstein. And when you start looking at the people who've been taken in by him, with the last lot of emails and everything that's been sent out, I mean, okay, don't worry, we're getting back to Mandy because that had the House of Lords situation. It's utterly ridiculous. But when you start looking at who else got caught, I mean, George Mitchell, who some people, if they've got a Northern Ireland kind of connection, would remember. He was the chairman of the Northern Ireland peace talks. And he was seen as absolutely walking on water, above all impeachment by both sides of a pretty bitter conflict. And he was Chancellor of Queen's University Belfast for a decade after the peace deal. They've just announced they're stripping his name from its Peace Institute and there's a big kind of statue of him at the university entrance. He served as Chancellor, actually, of Queen's University in Belfast for a decade after that peace deal. And they've just announced that they're stripping his name from their Peace Institute. They're taking a statue of him out of the university entrance. And that's because of, the allegations that he visited Epstein's island, which he, of course, they all deny it. But obviously for Queen's University, it's bang to rights enough that they've just acted to remove him. And even Noam Chomsky, you kind of think, Noam Chomsky? I mean, this is a famous academic linguist and all that, who is found in emails to be referring to the private Caribbean island. He was fantasizing about the island. Now, nobody can be absolutely certain if it was that island where children were being sexually abused. But, there's lots of familiarity between the two of them in their emails. And that's Noam Chomsky. And you've got to say, okay, there were women involved, Ghislaine Maxwell. Sarah Ferguson's charity, Fergie's charity, has closed because she was found to have simpered along and kind of, said to Epstein that she felt he was like a brother and taken money from him as well. So her charity is closing after all of that. But it's largely men who's just egos, sex drives, need for gratification, despite all their public appearances to the contrary, seem to have just been unable to control themselves when exposed to this really manipulative guy who could be anything to anyone and then just seems to kind of hold them in. So, anyway, but let's get back to Peter Mandelson.
Just before we drop onto, there's some quite interesting things from Andrew Loney, the royal biographer, who had been sort of widely poo-pooed and disbelieved, and there's a lot of work had gone on to kind of downplay any revelations that he'd made in various books about different members of the royal family. what do you call it? The Mountbattens, for example, who again, Lord Mountbatten, Louis Mountbatten, was, I think now quite well regarded, or believed to have been an active paedophile, and that may have been part of the reason why he was blown up by the IRA. But anyway, he's made various different claims about Epstein being involved initially, being sort of under the pay of the Russians, and then the Mossad, basically to go out and get compromat, and that's possibly some of the reason for this kind of active motivation of Epstein to get ensnare as many different people as possible in different places, and the amount of cash that was kind of swilling around. But it's these revelations.
That's extraordinary. That
and he had.
Is that kosher?
So he is now confident enough to back that up and to publish that, without sort of fear of being sued. He's had this book out in hardback about the fall of the Duke and Duchess of York. And it's now going into paperback, and there was various things in the hardback edition that the publishers were like, no, that's too hard to draw, you can't put that in, where he was quite happy with his sourcing because it couldn't be double sourced and it couldn't be absolutely pinned down. It was taken out for legal reasons, and is now all going back into the paperback because of these kind of ongoing revelations and sort of confirmation of some of the more outlandish claims that had been made have been found to be bang to rights and totally true. But yeah, back to Mandelson.
Yeah, but that's right enough, because Gordon Brown is obviously bailing that he called for an inquiry into Mandelson in September, and was told apparently on the record that there was no record of government papers or any kind of contact between the government and Mandelson and Epstein.
But I mean, I thought that was quite staggering, that level of yes minister, absolute made up bullshit, basically. We've investigated this, we've done a leak inquiry, but leak inquiries are not designed to find out who did a leak. They're designed to just be inquiries and sort of bob up and disappear and say you could have done something. Former Prime Minister asks for an investigation into these allegations. And what did they come back with? I mean, if you look at the actual text of that Gordon Brown statement, what the Cabinet Secretary seemed to be saying was, we've no evidence of any government memos between Peter Mandelson and Jeffrey Epstein where he's, revealed secret information. You're like, well, duh. I wasn't expecting him to call his private, please take a memo, James, write this down and then have it sent off an official government headed paper to Mr. Epstein in New York, using the diplomatic post bag for today. No, it was secret, underhand leaking of market sensitive information and basically telling him how to lobby against the British government.
Yeah, which, I mean, it's almost comical listening to everybody today getting themselves into a total froth about this, given their, utterly shambolic and shameful attempts to do any kind of reform to the House of Lords. Again, we'll come to that in a minute. But, in case anybody's still struggling with it, there's 3 absolutely clear cases of Mandy basically giving Epstein the nod. There was the EU's rescue facility for struggling member states. There was a £500 billion deal going to be announced tonight, told Mandy. And kind of within just days later, that was indeed announced, sending the euro on its biggest rally in 2 years. Now, everyone will have listened to the same stuff we've heard, I guess, but, people are being asked whether or not insider trading could be proved. And it seems like that is just one of the toughest things to make stick, because you need to see, a sort of causal links all the way along the line. So there will never probably be any evidence about whether or not Epstein then invested or didn't invest in the euro, what he did with that information. And if you haven't got it, you're not going to catch Mandy on insider trading. But then, there's plenty other stuff that should be able to happen to him. And yet we get to the obvious point that everybody is kind of thinking, which is, okay, he's already excluded from the House of Lords. The Lords can keep excluding him. But there's no legislation, it needs legislation to remove his actual peerage, which seems incredible, unless, of course, he resigns. And then we already know from Lord Malcolm Offord that he can sort of, hand, as it were, he can not
Well,
use
you can
the
stop,
title,
go to
but he
the chamber, yeah.
And decide not to use the title, but he is still, he is still a lord.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's ridiculous.
Or rather, worse situation, you could be prevented from going into the chamber of the House of Lords, but still swan about being Lord Mandelson. You're not an active legislator in the same way that, hereditary peers that aren't one of the few elected hereditaries, which is another anachronism, can continue to use their title. And I tried to have a look yesterday at the House of Lords disciplinary rubbish. I mean, unless you cite a security guard or are mean to, the lady in the canteen,
or gets a prison sentence,
yeah, then all you do is you get kind of suspended for various lengths of times. And Lord Shrewsbury did something, pulled a flanker with his his expenses, got had up, got suspended, finished his suspension, went back in and got had up for having done something else dodgy and got suspended for another fortnight.
Yeah.
I mean, we were talking in the kind of the region of a couple of £100 rather than actually telling somebody how to undermine the democratically elected government of the United Kingdom. But still.
But what's the rest of the stuff? I mean, because the rest of the stuff about, sort of essentially bringing, I've forgotten what the correct terminology is, but, bringing everything into disrepute or whatever. Yeah. I mean, it looks like he's holding public office and he's kind of acting incompatibly with that. I mean, that and then the complaint that Stephen Flynn has made quite rightly to the police. I mean, that could result in a prison sentence.
But I mean, it ought to be resulting in a prison sentence and a proper police investigation of Andrew Mountbatten Windsor for all of the dodgy dealings that he did when he was out and about being a trade ambassador for the UK and a kind of made up non-job and using it to his own financial advantage to set up weird and wonderful things with, such straight up play by the book countries as Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. So, there's a lot of criminality here just being sort of quietly swept under the carpet. And it's almost kind of too big to fail territory.
It's true, because, I mean, that's a public office, isn't it? The trade ambassador bit. So, I mean, and this is like, I was just trying to look through. I thought what you were going to say was you were trying to see what I was looking through, because there was a House of Lords hereditary peers bill in 2004, which was doing, really such minor fiddling with it all. I mean, it was going to remove the 92 hereditary peers that are left. And it was, there was a couple of other aspects of it. This has been slowly, I mean, okay, everything is slow, but it also worked its way through the House of Lords. There was discussion about amendments. There was a stage where Harriet Harman, whatever she's called as a lord or baroness, whatever it is, she was going to put, a feisty kind of insertion that she was going to create was that the 26 Church of England bishops who sit automatically would be removed, right? Which is like Doe pointing out that, in fact, the only other place that has clerics automatically included is Iran. So that's like how off-piste that aspect of the House of Lords behaviour is. But anyway, she then, after that, getting a bit of discussion last year, and I mean, you'd think these days that's hardly a biggie to just remove the automatic right. She withdrew the amendment before it got voted on in the House of Lords. So it's kind of like, and now, when I'm just having a look now at where we are with today, the calls for new legislation to strip Peter Mandelson of his peerage, there's a small observation that the Conservatives are, the Guardian reports, I understand the Tories won't create or back a bill to remove Mandelson's peerage. There is unease amongst Conservative politicians about the precedent using a large majority to go after individuals. Yeah, right, because when you look at the House of Lords reform, that timorous proposals that there were, absolutely the House of Lords has just the Conservatives in it have just absolutely stuck their, heels in and are not letting even the smallest amount of change happen, which leads, I would imagine, over the next couple of days, people to say, look, what the hell are we doing with this? The second largest unelected chamber in the world after the People's, forgotten the correct name of it, in China. What are we doing with this? We're just adding to it with all the claims that the Labour Party had made, to be going to cut numbers. There it is, just getting bigger. So I don't know. Will anybody? People keep talking about ideas that they've floated, and then it's very hard to see what happened to them. There was another proposal to make them retire at 80, which hasn't gone through, the age of 80, because that's too sort of, that's too much of a curveball as well. Do you think there might be a bit of head of steam starting from the public now to just get a totally elected second chamber?
Well, there might be a head of steam from the public, but that's the kind of thing that would be, studiously ignored by the current Westminster Government. It seems an anathema to us to be mumping more about the House of Lords, because we want to be out of this whole situation altogether, but we are stuck in the UK at the minute until Scotland becomes its own state and decides these things on its own. Whether we would have a unicameral or bicameral system is kind of yet to be seen. The Isle of Man has just taken the decision to boost off the bishops from the Manx Parliament. Just the end of last month. You would think that these would be the kind of easy wins, but you soon come to realise that the established church in England is very kind of interwoven into the process, and then you get people kind of shooting in from the sidelines going, well, actually, shouldn't we just maybe have more and a kind of wider range of spiritual leaders in the Lords to give a more kind of rounded view? And you're like, no, we should have people that are actually chosen, not just kind of there because of the positions that they hold. There is obviously a kind of underlying constitutional concern which they fall back on, in as much as that kind of removing people from a legislature is dangerous, and if there were kind of sweeping powers to do that, a more kind of authoritarian regime down the line could begin muck about with kind of supposedly democratic structures. But that's not what's been called for here. As you say, it's not the National People's Congress of China. People are supposed to be there doing an honest and good job. The Lords occasionally, and don't shoot me for this, do actually do quite a good job of tidying up and scrutinising legislation that's been hurried through and kind of sent in a complete guddle by the Commons. And there are obviously all these kind of subject matter experts in the Lords that go in and about it and, do quite a significant amount of work. And sometimes when the Commons is off to its bed and everybody's away home, the House of Lords are still up there to the middle of the night, footing around having, beard-pulling debates about things. But
but so would any elected chamber of that. So do the people that are the trustees of the Isle of Egg. And there's none of them paid. And there's none of them hereditary. This is, it's unbelievable. There's a brilliant bit written by Simon Pearson, who I've started reading, is Substack. I've ventured into the world of Substack. I went on last night and sort of had to sign in for something, and I've already got loads of people signing up to my Substack. It doesn't exist, right? I was only going on to read somebody else's stuff, but anyway, I don't really understand it. Anti-capitalist musings. It sounds a wee bit sort of stampy-footy, but by gum, this guy is Simon Pearson. Very, very good. And when he was talking about the Lords, he was saying it's an institution that grants status permanently, regardless of subsequent behaviour. It embodies the principle that the powerful should face no consequences. This is not an anomaly within British governance, it is the template. Actually, he's got so many, totally 100%. And then, actually, if you just look back in time, even in 2012, were you there?
No, 2015, 2016, yep.
Just before your time, my dear. Yes. So David Cameron and Nick Clegg put forward a proposal to reduce the size of the Lords and bring in an elected chamber. Since you don't remember what's happened, that prompted another rebellion on the Conservative benches that threatened to frustrate other legislation. Now, that actually brings to another point, which is I've been following up the progress of the assisted dying bill, which still hasn't got a date in Scotland, but will happen in March sometime. Not so what's going on south of the border, because the House of Lords has introduced so many amendments to Kim Leadbeater's bill, which is a similar sort of bill to the one that Liam MacArthur put forward in the kind of special podcast we did. Anyway, the House of Lords have put thousands of amendments in. They're coming from about 7 people. Most of them are Tories, and they have essentially just gridlocked the progress of that bill. So there is almost no chance now that it will finish its passage before the end of this session, which weirdly ends in mid-May with the King's speech. And that means that all the work they've done essentially is for naught, unless they use the Parliament Act, which is at 1911 or something, some sort of piece of legislation to reintroduce it and effectively force it through the House of Lords, or, which will happen, or there's another intention to try and find somebody else to pick up the bill and run with it if they win the ballot that will happen after the King's speech when it's a new session. Whoever tops that ballot will take on Kim Leadbeater's bill and have to go through the whole thing from the beginning. I mean, if anybody wants to talk about the mother of parliaments, right, just think through what nonsense this is. And if there's a chance that the top 1 or 2 in the private members thing are actually opposed to it, although the majority of parliamentarians, I understand, MPs are supportive. But if you end up just with that happenstance that you ain't got somebody at the top of the queue who's willing to take this one on, that results in a situation where Scotland may well progress to have assisted dying legislation and England doesn't. And just in case then people are thinking that there might be a bad situation of people moving north to take advantage of what will eventually be available in Scotland, just to echo again what Liam MacArthur mentioned, which is that you need to have been resident here for 12 months prior to taking advantage of any of that and on the electoral register. So that is thought to probably mean that there's very little chance of movement across the border. But still, that's the level of what the House of Lords is able to kibosh. And I mean, okay, so we're talking today about Peter Mandelson, but this is absolutely outrageous that this small group is able to block what is probably 70% support in the population across these islands, and that won't go forward because of 7 of them who weren't elected.
I mean, it's well worth going in and looking back on the feed and listening to that Liam MacArthur interview if you've not already done so. I spoke to a few people the other day who were interested in it and who are listeners to the pod, but had kind of shied away from listening to the Liam MacArthur podcast because they just didn't want to kind of think too deeply about the process. But it was a really good interview, and it takes through some of the kind of pros and cons and explains a lot more about how the Scottish Bill is going to operate. And really, if you've been kind of thinking, I must dip into that, I'd highly recommend scrolling back a bit on the feed and listening to that interview.
Yeah. It's not. I know, because I feel like this a lot of the time. But it's strange. It wasn't a tremendously gloomy kind of discussion at all. It was just very impressive that any aspect of it, like how the workforce would react to it, all these things had been thought through. There'd been committee meetings about it. I think you would end up being quite impressed at the whole process the Scottish Parliament had put through for
Now,
it.
private members' bills are very difficult, first of all, to get, because it's a kind of a ballot. You either have to kind of have your name drawn out of a hat, or there's what used to be called a sleepover bill. This is talking about the House of Commons, of course, not the Scottish Parliament. You used to have to go and queue up overnight to be there, first of all, to get into the vote office. And
Really?
there's a BBC documentary inside the Commons of them, basically kind of like in a sleeping bag. So they could be first in some people are going for the Take That reunion tour, and other people are queuing up to get their name on this list where you can put forward your private members bill. And then there's a kind of so that's now been replaced with a first come, first served email. So if you get your email in within the first, whatever it is, 7 people, then you get to go forward. They're normally used as campaigning platforms. You get an opportunity to raise debates in the Commons and take control of the chamber for a period of time. they very seldom actually progress to legislation unless they have government backing. And Ash Regan's prostitution bill, the Unbuyable Bill, which looks to bring in the Nordic model into prostitution in Scotland to make the selling of sex legal, but the buying of sex illegal. So pushing the burden of illegality onto the person trying to pay for the service rather than the prostituted woman, has its stage one debate today, but it looks like it's potentially going to fall. There's been a kind of mixed coverage of this bill. I think the Herald particularly keeps calling it the controversial bill. It doesn't seem that controversial, but there have been a number of prostitution groups who have been opposed to it, as well as the Royal College of Nursing. But again, this is, has flushed out quite a significant amount of debate, and whether it goes through or not, and it looks likely that the SNP will squash it in the way that governments normally do private members' bills, it has raised quite an important topic.
Yeah. And I mean, apparently this system was introduced, it seems to have been introduced in Northern Ireland. But whatever, people seem to accept that it may have kind of reduced the level of prostitution in Norway. But when you look at it, does look like there's quite a lot of opposition from sex worker groups in Scotland. They've organised a new organisation to bring themselves all together. So it feels like there's quite a lot kind of against Ash's bill. In addition to just it shouldn't be like this, but the politics of it mean that it hasn't got a hope, has it? There's been
perhaps less mature debate about this because it's been put forward by Ash. I mean, Ash is coming to it, I think, from a very good place, and it's moves on further from her other work in support of women and girls and the women and girls organisations that she champions, and it seems like a very sensible fit for her and the type of work that she wants to do as a parliamentarian, and as a kind of backbench parliamentarian sitting as an independent. That's the kind of thing that she's been able to put forward. Margot MacDonald, of course, when she sat as an independent, took things in the opposite way and was looking to predominantly decriminalise the selling of sex work to make sure that women were better able to access health support, for example, and routes out of prostitution without the fear of potential prosecution and harassment by the police. So, obviously there are members of the SNP that fall foul of Ash because she left the SNP after the leadership campaign and went to Alba, and I suppose equally there are members of Alba who are less happy that she was in Alba for a short period of time and then left Alba. But, it's been an important bit of debate, and just kind of badging it as controversial, I don't think has been particularly useful.
I know this is skipping back a bit, but when we're on this question of still, controversies within political parties, the other bit that we haven't sort of looked at coming, to this situation with Peter Mandelson is how badly this reflects on Kier Starmer and Morgan McSweeney, who was, again, Morgan McSweeney was the one who pushed for Mandelson to be the ambassador to the United States. And another guy who just seems to have been totally taken in, okay, their politics is all the same. It's sort of blue Labour, so that is now a kind of another difficulty for that side of the Labour Party. But, I mean, Starmer's up for first Prime Minister's questions tomorrow. It'll be interesting to see what happens. But it makes him look incredibly weak. I can see there's somebody reporting a conversation from a minister who texted after Mandelson had quit the Labour Party saying, "This just makes Kier look weak again. We should have thrown him out." And asking whether Starmer should remove Mandelson's peerage however it's done. The minister replies, he must. So, there's a lot of speculation now about, well, will Morgan McSweeney be the sacrificial lamb? Will they leave him in post so that he can take all the heat after the May election results, which will be really bad? What do you think about that?
I don't think the backroom boy is capable of taking on enough flack. even Dominic Cummings wasn't enough of a lightning rod. Morgan McSweeney, I think, has been integral to all this, disaster that's been following the Labour Party since it's been elected. Kier Starmer doesn't seem to have any particular political direction, and that has really, he's fallen foul of that. So he's just kind of coasting from issue to issue. I mean, who on earth, would you employ this man? How many times has he been fired as a government minister? The Hinduja affair, the passports, the paymaster generals, Jeffrey Robertson taking, loans and not declaring them, for the,
well remembered.
There's just kind of, situation after situation of him kind of getting put out, bouncing back in because he was such a kind of new Labour stalwart and was so, part of the kind of inner circle, the plan to reform Labour and make it electable for the 1999 and 97 election. So, it kind of beggars belief, all of these things about Mandelson's connections with Epstein were known at the time when he was being vetted at the highest level to do one of the biggest diplomatic jobs that we have. And, just being able to butter up Trump was not necessarily a, stellar credential. I can't remember the name of the lady that could have continued or was going to be put in, who was equally a very shrewd operator and had the kind of MAGA types eaten out of her hand that would have been very good as UK ambassador.
Yeah.
But, it had to be jobs for the boys, and Mandy had to come back. And it was just a disaster waiting to happen, and it's happened. So, it again undermines Starmer. I saw was it Colin Mackay yesterday with Anas Sarwar, but you said he was your best pal. You were giving it, last year you were, bigging up your credentials about how influential you were in the Labour Party and that you were bezies with Peter Mandelson. Is he still your best pal? And Sarwar just kept typing out the same kind of lines about how terrible it was, and he was glad that he was gone, but couldn't move off that, couldn't give you any kind of human response, and it just takes up political airtime and continues this downward decline of the Labour Party, and pulling out again this week, showing that Reform are second in the Holyrood contest, with Labour slipping down behind them, and no chance really of forming an administration, and very unlikely perhaps even to be the kind of proper opposition.
And I see that Pete Wishart has jumped onto the Anas Sarwar situation. There's a wee piece in the National about him urging Pete Wishart urging Anas Sarwar to disclose all his correspondence with Mandelson. I mean, I don't know if he's going to get looped in, because if it wasn't already revealed in any of that email exchanges, then it will probably seem like kind of small beer compared to the whopping great stuff that's sitting in front of our noses. But, there was relatively recently kind of exchanges. There was apparently a meeting in April 2025, after which Sarwar was said to have described Mandelson as an old friend. It is a bit weird though, isn't it? Because it's now, there's almost no contact that anyone can have had with Mandelson without it now spreading.
Which is kind of why you have to be like a normal person and try and give a kind of reasonable answer. It reminded me of the film Clear and Present Danger, where the president, what was that? Is that Harrison Ford? Yes, I think so. Anyway, it's a bit like currently what's happening with Trump, when they go into Nicaragua and, off some drug dealers. And one of the president's pals is killed on a yacht. And the lead guy gives him political advice on what to say. We get asked if he's your friend. Just you should look down the barrel of the lens and say, he was my lifelong friend. I'm deeply shocked. Whereas Sarwar just kind of flaunted out the same kind of two lines they'd been provided by his press office. I couldn't actually, give you any kind of proper first ministerial level of nuance in it, other than just report, constantly repeating the same thing that he said before.
But I mean, it baffles me because that is Anna Sarwar's style. I mean, he's terribly sort of robotic and repetitive. And I suppose, the alternative Stephen Flynn's side, which can sometimes get, a bit into the jokey about stuff. Nonetheless, he seems to have kind of hit the right mark with, well, just straightforwardly putting this forward as a police matter. And I think he was on Newsnight last night. I mean, there's another story that spun out of that with Emily Thornberry complaining that English students in Scotland don't get free tuition, which he seems to have dealt with again in a good, sort of keeping the heat a little bit and sort of pointing out that, well, if we were independent, we could do so much more that actually is better than England for people, but. He's got a good style with this at the moment, which will be serving the SNP
definitely, and
the
student debt crisis in England and the amount of interest that's been wanged onto these colossal debts. People basically never able to afford to fully pay off their student loans with the interest charges that are being put on, even in kind of high paying graduate jobs and then kind of serious professionals, just having this kind of constant millstone of debt hanging over them is setting up to be quite a differential for the election to come. And I was speaking to somebody the other day who was chatting to somebody who just had totally missed that people in England obviously pay for their prescriptions. And of course, it's per prescription. I remember working in London and having a terrible kind of hay fever problem and being wheezy and having to get an inhaler for the first time ever. And I got antihistamines and an inhaler. And of course, it was two separate charges. And she said, "How do you normally pay?" I said, "Well, I don't pay. I come from a country where this doesn't happen." I was kind of looking at me quizzically, like, "But you're British." I'm like, "Well, not actually." So
I think, do they not have an?
I mean, if you've got obviously long term,
you have to be regular,
conditions
basically.
But again, that was one of the reasons why we brought it in.
But still, it's still outrageous. And you're absolutely right. People, I mean, I know we sometimes castigate the SNP for kind of getting the old hits out, I mean, they're 4 albums in and they're still going on the first, cut through album. But you do have to kind of keep reminding people that this is just not happening down the road. So, anyway, we'll wait to see what happens with Prime Minister's questions tomorrow, and also with that police inquiry and how far it extends, because you're absolutely right. I mean, somebody, and it should be Stephen Flynn, should be making the same case against the former Prince Andrew.
They've refused to release. Normally, you've got, the 25-year rule that documents should be released into the National Archive from government departments, but all the ones about Prince Andrew have just been conveniently withheld, and of course they will be, tidied up. The bits that are not required will be deleted off and removed and quietly forgotten about before anything actually hits in there.
I wonder, though, maybe I'm the only person in the universe that gets so angry about the House of Lords I could explode sometimes, because it is just such an absolute nonsense that we all just, oh, well, yeah, these guys unelected, and yeah, about a third of them have got interests in private healthcare, but yeah, they're able to vote on legislation that, affects things like healthcare. And oh, look, England still has a system of essentially privately run health trusts. Do you think that's kind of related to the fact that so many of them have got interests in private healthcare in the House of Lords? No, nobody's going to even start that conversation. And of course, that happily doesn't affect us directly in Scotland, because, we've got our own. We did not have the Health and Social Care Act 2012. But it's outrageous that we're just going to shrug and move on with this. And I would love to see the SNP come forward, albeit, and they should take brownie points for this, they have never put forward anyone for the House of Lords because it is essentially corrupt. So nice one. But that does lead you to moments like this where there's no direct skin in the game, because there's nobody in the House of Lords from the SNP.
Poor old Ian Blackford would jump in there if necessary, though, I'm sure, if only needed to be asked.
But he's, But it ain't going to happen. So the point is, somebody needs to come right back in now while the public is just kind of like, God almighty, and just put even the proposals that blinking David Cameron and Clegg put forward, 7, 8 years ago, which is to create an elected chamber. Of course they won't. Nobody's got time. There's elections happening here. There's no bandwidth to take in big subjects like this.
Well,
But
then there'd be the question of what kind of
somebody
elected
needs to
chamber
do
you're
it.
going to have. Is it going to be a Gordon Brown Senate of the Nation and Regions? Ahim adoots.
Well, then fine. So
Yeah.
here's another giddy possibility. They could follow the Irish example, which obviously ain't going to happen because the Mother of Parliaments doesn't
Yeah.
follow anybody's example, and they could set up a proper citizens' assembly on it,
Absolutely. Indeed.
which also won't
Well,
happen.
I mean, but it ought to. Part of me as a good yeser thinks, you don't want to necessarily be campaigning to make the British state a more effective and better run, because you're kind of A, on a hiding to nothing, and B, it's not really kind of where our energies should be diverted to. Particularly the nations and regions. I mean, there's absolutely no chance whatsoever of Gordon Brown's musings on these things ever coming to fruition, because it would require people in England to give up power from their parliament. And there's no kind of coming together of Scotland and England in this union parliament. It's simply an English parliament with Scotland added on the top of it. And the idea of federalism and people in England seeing their parliament's powers diminished in order to kind of rebalance the devolution settlement. It takes two to tango, and there's
Yeah, I mean, I hear what you say, but the things like, let's take the federalism thing, as long as that's still sitting in a lot of people's minds, that there could be some move towards federalism. Some of these things absolutely need to be exposed for the complete dead ends that they actually are. There is no way that the Conservatives, mind you, diminishing in importance totally. So it'd be interesting to see what Reform's position is on the House of Lords. God, what a world we're in. But, if somebody is saying, look, here is a ludicrous situation that pertains to Britain's aspects of hereditary control and the complete impunity that people are allowed to behave with. Here is what Britain stands for in this respect. It needs this complete reform to just bring it into not even the 21st century, but just, let's hurple in the 20th century with it. And it can't do it. It's that I think in the same way as you were saying it's good to remind people of what happens south of the border where you're not entitled to hee-haw, there's also the fact that these perfectly straightforward reforms will never happen because they will I suppose what will happen is nobody will catch the ball. But I must say, I would be still trying to make the case for it now, because I think the head of steam's out and people need to know, I'd be reminded again of the utter corruption of what runs this country.
Speaking of the House of Lords, what about the Baroness Davidson of, was it London Links? I can never quite remember.
London Links. Yeah, it's in Fife, which is why you don't know
over the water, eh?
Super.
I'm from the West Coast, I can't be knowing all these sorts of things. Centrist Dad has got a new bitey in. So Sir Andy Street, he of the Inside John Lewis documentary and formerly mayor of somewhere, and Ruth Davidson have launched this new movement for the politically homeless, basically a kind of woolly version of the Conservatives, hoping to attract a silent majority, really. And just think, away you go.
I know we've been we've been missing all the kind of movements every week that we've meant to talk about the kind of number of grisly old Tories that have jumped ship across to reform. Something more important has happened that's kind of rather eclipsed that. But still, so Ruth Davidson, it is in fact the West Midlands. He lost combined authority mayor Andy Street. It's Prosper UK. This is their new political. Now, the day they launched that was another. I think somebody else jumped ship across to to reform. I love this actually not dignifying.
They are. I mean, they are all out of Tory central casting, so it's they've not got the Pritzker yet, but I mean
they feel a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, so So they're now sort of saying that this could, this is common sense centrist stuff, and that they think that there's a kind of place for all of that. I've got to say that I'm looking here at a kind of piece from the Telegraph, which that you might think would be the kind of direction they were trying to go in if they want to get a bit of support, which concludes that the problem is Nigel Farage is simply better at being right wing. So, but it's interesting seeing everybody think they've got the solution to all of this, whilst there's a political party sort of hobbling along, getting lower and lower in the polls. It's a weird time that we're in here while you're waiting for this kind of massive shift, should it happen. I do hear people as well who are worth listening to suggesting that there might have been a bit of a platform reached with reform as a combination of the kind of losers, basically, that are kind of the corrupt old losers that are basically jumping ship. And this is where things like Mandelson brings all of that into disrepute, because it's all entitlement. It's all, I was big back, back in the day. So, hey, there's going to be a big tirade at the idea that I'm joining you now. And if anything just shows the lack of wisdom and kind of entropy at work in that outlook, it's going to be Mandelson, and it's not going to go away because that's going to keep working its way around. So you've got Nadim Zahawi. Well, whoa, that's great. But there's also this sort of, the worry about basically not being able to organise a piss up in a brewery type worries with reform. It might be wishful thinking. I mean, I saw a piece that Richard Murphy wrote in the National about this, where he hoped that there was a kind of level of plateau being reached. But still, it needs. His piece though also went on to say that the legacy parties, as they're now being called, and the SNP would be one, are just not exciting people enough. So. Okay, the SNP looks like they'll be the largest party with a much smaller share of the vote than last time round. And I don't know if that's as good as it's going to get.
Yeah, I mean, the SNP, campaign, to my mind, are heading for a position not in the kind of landslide way that the Labour government had in the 2024 election, but in the kind of unloved voting pattern. I don't like that Kier Starmer. I don't know what he stands for, but it was better than having another Conservative government in, so that's what I'm going to vote for them. And I think you could similarly read across to the current SNP. I don't think we're going to necessarily see anything particularly shiny out of the manifesto, and even if there are kind of eye-grabbing things in the manifesto, I dare say people won't imagine that they're actually going to be transacted on, or they'll be watered down to the point of kind of pointlessness. But if you don't want reform, you're not going to vote Conservative, and you want to give the Labour Party a kicking, and the Labour Party, of course, are looking utterly appalling. The SNP are going to benefit from that in the way of kind of unearned income, and do well at the election, or do better than they might otherwise have done because of the kind of events surrounding other political parties. Just back on the Ruth Davidson thing, I mean, it struck me that the reason that Ruth Davidson was so successful is she was a much more credible unionist than the Labour Party. And so lots of Labour voters lent their vote to Ruth Davidson in order to stop a second independence referendum around the sort of 2016s and what have you. And that kind of groundswell and rise in the Conservative vote was again sort of unearned income. But they were much more convincing unionists than the Labour Party were, and they were going to be a much better opposition to an independence referendum than Labour. And Labour kind of looked a bit hollow in their opposition to Indy Ref 2. Similarly, she thinks she's going to come in now and sort of target reform or be a kind of home for people that find reform kind of beyond the pale. But there are much more convincing, as you say, right-wing party than the Conservatives are, and they're certainly going to be much more convincing than Prosper UK as a kind of internal Conservative supporting movement. So there is obviously a significant amount of polarisation.
Where would they be trying? where would they be trying to, because they're not apparently not trying to stand.
No, they're just kind of
themselves,
geeing up
although,
the Tories,
it's early
basically.
days for,
and trying to be a kind of a bit like, I don't know whether it's going to be like sort of Labour and cooperative or what it actually is. I suppose you've got Blue Labour. This is centrist Tories trying to kind of make a name for themselves. I assume that they've got some kind of funding from somewhere, and that's why it has, come together as this kind of entity. But it's not remotely convincing, and I don't think the silent majority exists in the way that she thinks it does, or the way that they're putting forward that it does. And it's certainly not going to be a lager that reaches the parts that others don't. So I really don't see what it is. And I don't think she has realised that the reason that she was successful in Scotland in garnering votes is because she looked better than a weak alternative. And Reform are doing the same. They look better than a weak Tory, and a kind of apologising for being left, right of centre, or right leaning, and kind of strongly conservative, and being kind of nervous about their positions on things in a way that Farage isn't.
Yeah.
Aye.
Oh, that's enough time spent on these Tories anyway. God almighty, Are you going to go and see the...
Well, I am. Well, I think I am going to have to try and find a type. Well, I don't know. I thought since Pat used to watch Question Time, and which is on at 11 o'clock at night, which is, beyond, that was a real kind of labour of love for the pod. So I thought I might go and see the Melania just so that I could actually kind of experience it on the big screen, and understand what the heck it's all about. Apparently it's doing better than its critics had expected. It's obviously a limited cinema run just before it goes on to Netflix, I think, or is it Amazon? Can't remember. And but yeah,
it's Amazon, isn't it? Because it was Jeff Bezos that put was it $1 million or something into it, or more than that?
Yeah,
paid her.
Trump is apparently quite grumpy because he thinks that all of his family kind of mooch off of him, and that they're only they only have any kind of standing as a result of him. So anybody else getting in the limelight makes him very angry. And they were suggesting that it wasn't a coincidence that the Department of Justice released the Epstein stuff at the same time as her film was premiering. But apparently, I was listening to some stuff the other day about what it's actually about, and she's even more two-dimensional on the documentary than you would think in the press, and even things that are supposed to be in her wheelhouse kind of fashion and what have you, she has no kind of technical skill or great insight. She's like, I make a collar bigger, you make a collar stand up, it's rather than kind of having this kind of very fashion sensitive understanding of how things are constructed. So yeah, I think it would be a kind of macabre spectacle to potentially go and report back, dear listener, on the findings of the Melania documentary.
Well, you're on your own with that one, actually. I was just looking at how many, talking about the States, how many of the big sort of anchor characters. I mean, these are not household names for us, but I mean, there's been some incredible developments that's really rocked the States with arrests that happened this week. Don Lemon, who used to be an anchor for CNN, was arrested on Friday in Los Angeles because he was violating the rights of worshippers at a church because he covered protesters who were allegedly interrupting services. And this seems to be kind of quite extraordinary. He then turned up on a program with Jimmy Kimmel Live. He, of course, also getting temporarily booted out because of outspoken things he'd said about Trump. So it's kind of like, there's a lot of these quite forthright. I mean, obviously, people have also spotted Bruce Springsteen's music that he wrote about Minneapolis seeming to get to pretty much the top of the charts and vastly annoying Donald Trump. It's happened before. Every time there was an election, especially Springsteen kind of put all his effort on trying to get the Democrats elected. And and yet it didn't kind of work. So it'd be interesting to see how this works now with the number of journalists who are just getting charged with conspiracy and all sorts of rubbish, basically, which is beginning, it's got people talking about the Second Amendment, which is freedom of the press. This is now just being completely pushed to one side. That seems to have crossed a line for quite a lot of people.
In any other circumstances, if this was a Latin American country or something, we would call it totalitarianism, and it was actually, quite heavily slipped into a kind of police state. It wasn't just, the fact he was arrested. Again, it's the kind of manner of these arrests. He was offered to come in. His lawyer, I think, had given, name the date and we'll come in for a voluntary interview. But that's not what they want in America. They love a perp walk. So he was, kind of huckled away from a hotel lobby with a whole bundle of federal agents to be, taken off, jostled and handcuffed, rather than just kind of coming in for, what's kind of sort of civil violation. It wasn't as if he was kind of wanted for murder or anything. It was kind of interrupting a protest, as you say. A very militaristic and police
to be clear.
statey.
But to be clear about it as well, actually, now that I'm just having a kind of look at it here, all he was doing, and there was another journalist, Georgia Fort, were going in. There was this particular church in question, the city's church in St. Paul. The guy who was a pastor is an ICE official, so which is a bit of an unusual circumstance. So that's what had prompted demonstrators to turn up with chants of ICE out, which obviously is happening all over the States. And so Lemon and Fort, who is a local journalist there, had entered the church to cover the demonstration, which was essentially a demonstration against the immigration crackdown, happening in St. Paul's, Minneapolis. So that's just a job of reporting, which, two reporters were going about doing. And it's that which just seems to, to many people to be just completely unprecedented for the Justice Department to invoke those kind of laws about journalistic activity. And, I think it behoves journalists across the world to take note of what line's been crossed there. I mean, a lot of people will say, Jings, that is small beer compared to the dozens of journalists who've been killed in Gaza by the IDF. But we've got to get to a state of watching now what's happening in the States and what response and protest is still ongoing there that isn't getting the coverage on the mainstream media that it really deserves.
No, and it should really question the sort of degree of enmeshment and enthrallment we have to the United States of America. There's some really good stats out. Somebody in another podcast I was listening to the other week, I think it's only like 4% of the entire world population and 2% of the kind of youth population are in the United States, yet it dominates something like 75% of all capital investment. And it kind of sort of sucks up money from across the globe in a way that's actually possibly quite high risk now for your pension funds and what have you. We're talking about the Danish pension funds disinvesting in America and prevents growth elsewhere in the world. The dollar is continuing to slide, I think, and this seems to be part of Trump's plan to reduce the value of the dollar in order to make exports more competitive, but it's certainly also making the United States look much less investable and much less stable.
There's also something I'd noticed, which is the French.
Well, we've cheeky, chappy, slappy,
yeah, zut alors. But they've set up an account called French Response, which is spearheaded by a senior advisor for the foreign ministry, with there's about half a dozen people drafting posts and managing it day to day. And it is actually hilarious because they've just decided to go front-footed up to Trump, particularly. And they do really sort of, I mean, the stuff that you get out of officialdom is usually so incredibly tedious, basically, and just trying to make sure it's not creating a fence and all that kind of stuff. It's not worth even signing on to those accounts. Whereas these ones are kind of really sort of using little. I mean, I'm looking at one here where I think it was Trump had talked about the EU, bureaucrats being totally panicked by his kind of efforts on tariffs a little while ago, and they've got a picture of two French guys that look kind of fairly under the weather with a bottle of Campari, and it just says panicked EU bureaucrats right now. So it's different stuff, and it's got quite a lot of followers. So it's just kind of trying to, if you've got to try to join the sort of sentiment of the casual nature of Musk, Trump. Part of the reason that they hit home is because they do use ordinary language, and then they're responded to with, proceeding in a northerly direction. So it looks like the French have just cut through and decided, little films, punchy headlines.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite interesting. We'll put up a link to that in the show notes, and it's like kind of cheese-eating surrender monkeys are biting back, and very acerbically, and it should be good for a laugh, if nothing else. But necessary. Oh goodness, do we? Yes. And in fact, this American stuff just eats up so much headspace for governments. Never mind for ordinary, people just going about their day-to-day business. Not the kind of cathedral thinking that the Nordics have. You had one of the first screenings of the film. And we've also got an interview it's a bit of a kind of trailer talking about that kind of cathedral thinking, that long-term approach to planning in the Nordics. How are things going over that way?
Yeah, absolutely. It occurred to me that it was good to have somebody who's an actual Finn, just pulling a lot of the threads together that was in the film. And it was great. Tayport was Stappet Foo. There was more folk than turned up for the Denmark film. I was a wee bit worried about that, because I took a straw poll in the room, and probably about a third of the people in the room had visited Denmark. There were 6 people who'd gone to Finland. So, in that people are often interested in what they've already visited and find relatable, it worried me a little bit that maybe Finland seems just a bit of a kind of country too far or something. But anyway, it was great. Great conversation after it. And actually, Mikko Ramstedt came along to it. Now, I knew Mikko for a long time. He was head of the Scottish, I'm going to get this wrong, I think it was Futures Forum in the Parliament, but he now runs a housing trust. And he just managed to put into perspective, when I keep asking in the film, why do other countries not pick up the incredible kind of advances that Finland seems to have taken in its stride, mostly because it totally makes sense, and they just lay out for you exactly why it saves money, makes sense, makes the world a better place, and they did it 20 years ago. You just are left with why can nobody else pick this up? And this is what Mikko had told us.
Well, if you talk to city planners in Finland, they plan for 60 years. That's their time frame. They already know what they're planning to do in 60 years' time. So where houses go, where roads go, it's in that long-term perspective, so that you approach every problem in the same way. If you take an example, in the 70s, there was a high mortality rate in the east of Finland, particularly among men. So the municipalities who look after healthcare decided we've got to do something about this. They took a 40-year perspective, how we change. We start from school kids, free school meals, education about exercise, classes for middle-aged people, and over 20, 30 years, they've changed that. So the same thing with prisons. Finland had the highest prison population in Europe up until the 60s. It didn't work, didn't stop reoffending. So there was a plan how we changed this, and that's been implemented over 20, 30 years because people work together and they are focused on the goal as opposed to winning the next election.
Yeah, it's incredible, that kind of long-term thinking. I think we are, to some degree in Scotland, moving slightly towards that. There's moves with the Edinburgh Futures Institute looking at how crime and poverty can be tackled in these kind of deep structural ways rather than just kind of small kind of program type things that might have occurred in the past. Scotland, of course, also has been doing a lot of work over the last 20 years on patient safety, and our patient safety program in Health Improvement Scotland have got a kind of really great world-beating reputation. But it's very interesting to look at how that's kind of been enmeshed across the whole of the Nordics and Finland particularly. And as, of course, the power of the local authorities, as he says, people that are elected locally looking at local problems and dealing with them.
People will think, this is a drum I just never seem to stop banging, but I can't remember offhand how many. It feels like it was between 350 and 400 local councils in Finland, same population, we have 32. And it just keeps coming back to this, that people, Finland's been described as the superpower of trust. So, okay, everybody wants that. There's another, what looks like a bit of low-hanging fruit. You can't pick it, because you need to grow that trust, and you can't, as a central government, grow trust. You can't do it by removing, it's gone, power from local people to run anything. And actually, we ended up having a fascinating discussion about that, which really, to my mind, digs right through to the core of, I think, why we didn't get a yes vote. And it really is because people have such deep-seated doubts about their own capacity and the capacity of people around them. And you can't model that. You can't demonstrate it. You've got no muscle memory because you ain't used those democratic muscles. We're not generally speaking in trade unions anymore. We've not got proper local mechanisms to run stuff. We're not generally speaking in charge of land, apart from Crofters Union branches in the Highlands, which might be why they've taken so much notice of legislation that lets them do community buyouts, because they've already got practice running a place. Whereas we've got practice of passivity. And if anybody thinks you can really make the wholesale changes that have to be made until you change that direction of travel, I honestly think you're kidding yourselves on. But anyway, it will doubtless, wherever the film goes, these kind of really interesting discussions will start again. It's Perth on Thursday of this week, and then Nairn on Saturday afternoon, and Inverness on Monday, which should be a good one because Gavin is Fae Inverness and is coming back for that one. So that is kind of the lad done good. And I hope his mum and dad are coming as well. But please come. And the link will be, in the notes.
Excellent. Well, I'm sure everyone to be looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to going to the Edinburgh one. All of the details are on the events page of leslieriddick.com. And big thanks again to our supporters, people that help make the pod possible. Of course, the pod's always free for everybody, but our pals and buddies who put in a few shekels to keep the podcast going are gratefully appreciated. We were at a podcast thing last week where they were talking about, actually, they really should have got the stat up here, but the amount of podcast content that Scots consume is far greater than anywhere else in the UK outside of London, and really kind of speaks to that traditional heritage of Scots reading more newspapers, as you said in the panel discussion, Leslie, and just being kind of interested and curious. And we like to keep this going as one of the few properly, fully independent indie podcasts looking purely at the perspective of Scotland being an independent country.
And the thing that I have to say astonished me was, having spoken to people who've got podcasts that they've been running for 5 years. 5 years? What's 5 years? I still can't believe this is 18 years I've been doing this every week. I say that and then I think, how's that even possible? I don't know how it's been possible. But I kind of expected a little bit of a sharp intake of breath, because 18 years felt to me longer than some of the existences of the young folk that were sitting in front of us, which should have, I thought, given a bit more of a kind of wow factor. But there's definitely a thing of, there's a quietness amongst some of that generation, of which, let's not get into this too much more. I was thinking to myself on the way home, everyone should practice breaking the rules regularly. Bending them, breaking them when they don't seem to make sense to you. speaking a bit out of turn, maybe taking a bit of a flyer, guffawing, making noises. Come on, everybody. This is sort of silence thing, which maybe it's a function of a whole panoply of things, but it's kind of a bit worrying. It just was I found it a very quiet room. Did you not think?
It was very timid. It was a slightly weird setup. Of course, there was lots of big boys there with their kind of BBC or, funded podcasts, or, I'd do it on behalf of a corporation, and then we hand it over to the sound tech and the producer to zhuzh it up a bit. And I think, God, we're doing absolutely everything from the website building to putting the podcast episodes together ourselves, all in a shoestring, which is why the buddies and pals make such a big difference to help us keep going. But it was quite a kind of timid audience, shall we say.
Considering that they're all there because they obviously want to put their lives into this, But then the other thing that I was thinking was, there's many things you might need to have to do a podcast, but having a blooming opinion about something is probably uppermost in it. And you don't suddenly develop opinions. I mean, I can remember when I was young having short shrift from, I would have to say, the men in my family, apart from my dad, but I mean, uncles and people who told me that girls shouldn't be speaking at the table. That I shouldn't be so opinionated. And there was all sorts of just, peer pressure to just calm down, just behave yourself. And you've got to just really try to keep thinking what you would think, what you would say, and then venture a little bit out there to try and verbalize some of it. Because people are not born with this kind of clock ticking. It's a practice thing. Even if you just practice in the car or anywhere quiet, just practice speaking aloud some of your opinions. You'll get better at it.
Well, and on that note, we will be back with more opinions and possibly, although I make no guarantees in terms of time, to be able to go and see the much guffawed at.
You're stuck with it now?
Can't wait till it comes out on Amazon Prime to really digest it. But I will try my very level best to report back from the Melania documentary for you, dear listener. And if that's not worth the subscription money, I don't know what is. And on that note, we'll see you next week, chums.